The original paper from Dunning-Kruger and David Dunning that has led to the popularization of the Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't talk about the wavy curve it is often associated with, but discusses poor performers and high performers. Their research was based on the idea that people tend to hold overly favorable views of their own abilities. The 4 research studies in this paper outline a proposed dual burden in that unskilled individuals reach erroneous or wrong conclusions, and their own incompetence prevents them from realizing it. This paper stems from the illusion of the above average effect. Many studies in various fields have found that most of us rate ourselves above average, which is statistically impossible. The average is most of us, but if most of us are above it, there is no average, which obviously can't happen. So Dunning and Kruger explored this with 4 predictions. The first: incompetent individuals compared to their competent peers will overestimate their abilities from objective criteria. The second: incompetent individuals will be less able to recognize competence when they see it in themselves or others. The third: incompetent individuals will be less able to make accurate comparisons to others because of their difficulty in recognizing competence in others. And the fourth and final prediction was that incompetent individuals can gain insight about their shortcomings, but paradoxically will come from becoming more competent. An important note here is that when they say incompetent, they are referring to people who are less competent than their peers. So it is a degree of competence through comparison, not an absolute. Their first study was about humour, giving people 30 jokes and asked them to rate how funny they were, comparing their answers to professional comedians. Once they rated the jokes on a scale from 1 to 11, they were asked to give a percentile rating of 1, I am at the very bottom, to 100, I am at the very top, with how accurate they thought they were compared to the other students. These results are the first time we see what we now perceive as the Dunning-Kruger graph. On the left side of the graph, in the bottom quartile, a big difference in actual and perceived scores, now known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, and the swap towards the top side for the top quartile, now known as the false consensus effect with that difference. In study 2, they added a second criteria, comparing participants' perceptions of actual scores to others. So now they have perceptions of percentile scores and raw scores. This was done on a logical reasoning 20-item test, and the results show much of the same from study 1. The gap in the bottom and top quartiles is still obvious, and for both criteria. Raw score as test score and perceived percentile as perceived ability. In study 3, they tested grammar. On a 20-item test, still looked at perceived percentile ability, compared performance to their peers, and raw test scores. The graph may look pretty similar at this point, same results, same effects, but they added a second phase to this study. Several weeks after the first study, they asked participants in the top and bottom quartile to go back. They gave 5 peer tests to them to grade how well they had done. The idea was that because they could compare the scores of these 5 peers to theirs, there might be an effect on their original answers, changing their perceived competence. In their results, they found bottom participants tended to raise their already inflated estimates. So with the comparison, they were getting their guesses more wrong. Consistent with the second prediction, the poor performers couldn't recognize competence when they saw it. It also supported prediction 3, in that poor performers are not impacted by seeing the performance of others. But to confirm their main proposition, that poor performers lack the metacognitive skills that allow them to tell how poorly they are performing, they need to manipulate competence and see if it improves metacognitive skills, and thus accuracy of self-judgments, which was prediction 4. So they gave a logic test to a group. Afterwards, half of the group got a logic training intervention and the other half didn't. They expected the training group would improve their ability to evaluate which test problems they had answered correctly or not, and adjust their miscalibration of their ability estimates. The test was 10 problems with all previous study criteria being measured. Unsurprisingly, without training, the results mimic the results of previous studies. But with the training, there was a significant difference, with those scoring in the bottom quartile being just as accurate as those in the top quartile. You can see in this graph the typical graph results, but when we look at the table, you can see on the right side in the training group lots of stars, which represents significant changes. The difference in before and after scores with stars show the training made their predictions more accurate, which you can see in all of the criteria from the bottom quartile individuals and second quartile individuals, helping every single person with the raw test performance estimates. These results suggest improved metacognitive skills. For logic anyway, helps with accuracy of performance misjudgments. Simply put, poor performers overestimate their ability, but top performers overestimate others' abilities. I have discussed feedback in a previous review, but this section brings up some different points. People receive negative feedback all the time about their skills and abilities. It doesn't mean they know what to do with it or want to do anything with it. Even if they get negative feedback, they need to find an accurate understanding of why that failure or issue occurred. In a perfect world, everyone could see the judgments and decisions that other people reach, accurately assess how competent those decisions are, and then revise their view of their own competence by comparison. But the world doesn't work like that. A review discussing the critiques of the effects found in this paper covers some potential solutions to this issue, but there is no go-to solution. Those explored critiques are discussed briefly, with motivation bias, self-serving traits, selective recall, and the tendency to ignore the proficiencies of others. But as stated, in other domains, competence is not just knowledge dependent. Coaches often understand the strategies and techniques to perform a skill, but not have the competence to do it themselves, which brings in a new dimension of the discussion of measuring competence and effectiveness. Each domain can be measured in different ways. What is valid or accurate will always be up for debate. The proposed dual burden is that performers make mistakes and are too incompetent to recognise them, which leaves me with questions about how to measure effectiveness and competence, how to learn about an unknown without intervention, and if there is a way of finding a proxy for our own incompetence in a particular subject area. What do you think?